Eric, let me ask you, like the Bills, curious. I mean, at 30, it just feels like I have seen so many variations
Sure.
of what people, who people think are going to be available, which position group that they need has the run early that maybe forces them into another pick. Like if you're looking at 30 and you're really thinking about like which position group, and I'll probably isolate interior defensive line and corner. Luckily, two position groups that if you need those position groups, this is probably, especially towards the middle part of that second round, a really great, two great positions to need. Luckily, that's where the Bills stand. Which do you, if you had to handicap this, the more likely position, defensive tackle or corner, that has that run before 30 that might force the Bills to either consider a move up a couple of spots, which they've been known to do, or, maybe force that pick at the number 5 corner in this draft or the number 5 interior defensive tackle? Which of those two positions do you think is more likely to have that mid first round run that might put the Bills into a tough spot?
Yeah, I think it's a great way to frame it, too, because I think that's one of the ways that Brandon Beane and his staff have to look at it is that, we've all heard that this is a deep defensive line class, which is great to hear, right? Obviously, it's a good thing if it's a position you're looking at targeting, but if there's also a run of 5 different guys, at depending on how you define defensive line, edge, interior, or whatever, combination of the two, if 5 of them go off the board before 30, does that guarantee that you're going to have somebody commensurate with your draft board, somebody worth taking there? Or, like you said, do you have to kind of be ready, and I know they have some picks they can play with, to move up, to make an aggressive move, especially after last year? And again, I'm not – maybe in hindsight they made the right move, but trading down twice and letting Xavier Worthy go to a foe that they end up facing every single year, that probably didn't go over very well. So I think
no, it didn't.
Their hands are going to be on the trigger. They're going to be ready to move if they have to. And I would think of the two positions, I would say D-line has a better chance of having that run happen ahead of time, mainly because of the needs of the teams picking in front of them. In reverse order, I mean, Washington's right ahead of them. Detroit after, in 28. Baltimore's always looking to replenish their lines of scrimmage. The Rams have built up that line, but again, that's been a philosophy of theirs to hoover up as many pass rushers and interior guys as they can. So, just looking at that, and then also the talent that I suspect will start coming off the board at some point in round 1, whether it's the teens or a little later. I think defensive line is going to be the position that you have to be ready to move on, especially if you have 1 or 2 players that you're specifically targeting and say, yeah, they're a great fit for our system.
Yeah, and I think, too, the drop-off at defensive tackle, specifically the one-tech position, you can definitely find, me and Bulldog were talking about, like bodies, like one-tech guys that, 2-gap players that are going to, you could probably pencil in as a good depth piece or a potential future starter, but that there are only a couple of names at the top of this draft that you could slot in a 4-3 at one tech that are going to give you the ability to have the higher end pass rush ability, which I think if you're the Bills, that's maybe why you would prioritize defensive tackle, one tech early in this draft. Do you view that if the Bills don't get that guy at 30, that they're probably not going to find him at the turn at 56 or 62. And how much of a position does that put them in where if guys like Harmon or Williams from Ohio State start going higher than maybe people think? Do you view that as the Bills are probably going to have to try to trade up? You almost don't see a scenario unless everyone at the defensive tackle position you really like, if you're Brandon Beane, are off the board, so you just go corner. I just wonder, where is that line of demarcation for you at one tech where you're just I like him, but he's not a first-round pick?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, obviously Mason Graham's going to probably end up being the 5th pick in this draft. If not, he goes 7th, and then there's probably going to be a gap after that. And I would classify Derek Harmon a little differently. I mean, again, some people may have a different view on this, and I've heard a few different sort of perspectives, but I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up being a 5 technique or somebody who can play multiple spots on the line, which, for the Bills could also work too. I'm not saying you can't put him there. And obviously a couple guys suspended. Joey Bosa's been injured. You may be able to line him up at end for a little bit, and some of those bigger ends that people use, and be okay with it in certain packages. So, I think he's going to be one of those 50-50 players. I don't think he'll be available there, but you never know. Kenneth Grant, massive dude who, moves really well, not as well as Harmon, but a good athlete and a guy who's played in cold weather before. And a lot of people feel like he helped make Mason Graham better than he was, and that was something that I heard throughout the scouting trail this offseason. And, Walter Nolan's really the interesting one for me. I mean, I see him as more of a 3 technique, but again, it's, some teams have a little different system and, how they view things and where they want, what gaps they want people slanting through and whatnot. But he's also one who could, if he went 11th to the 49ers, I wouldn't be shocked. If he lasted to the first couple picks of round 2, I wouldn't be stunned either. There's a wide kind of range on him and whether people truly view him as a special player. But, yeah, Tyleik Williams, I think, will be there, if I had to guess. He wasn't able to finish his 40 at his pro day. He got hurt about 28 yards into it. It's unfortunate, but he's a pretty good athlete for that size. I mean, he's pushing 330 and had a pretty good get-off on his 40 time, but before getting hurt. So, you want to extract that. Not super long. That's one of the things that some people have pointed out. But inside, working against short-arm centers, I don't think that's really a problem. So, yes, he's probably a run stuffer first, but he's got a little bit of penetration ability as well. He's maybe the tipping point. So like you said, if you see him go 28th or 9th, that's or whatever, even earlier than that for that matter, it's a bad sign for the Bills or a sign that they need to pick up the phone pretty quickly.
Eric Edholm, NFL Media, NFL.com on the NFL Draft here on the West Her Hotline. I want to pivot to talking about receiver here for a minute with you, Eric, because I know, usually, I can get this out without it taking up too much time. The final game informs a lot of how the fan base and maybe even the team feels about what their needs are. And the Bills lost another close game to Kansas City, and the defense did not have a strong showing again against the Chiefs. Not that there's a ton of shame in that, but then of course 2 weeks later, here come the Eagles, and I mean they just repeatedly punch the Chiefs in the face over and over again. And the day after the Super Bowl, it's like, oh, I got to improve my defense because it turns out Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes can be stopped. And then as the weeks go by, I sort of start to think, well, I don't need to beat Kansas City by 24 points like the Eagles did. I just need to beat them, and I'm right there even with my defense. And I've had the ball in Josh Allen's hands around the 2-minute warning with a chance to win with a touchdown 2 years in a row in the playoffs and not gotten it done on that side of the ball. That's not to take the defense entirely off the hook, but I wonder about a receiver if it were to fall right for the Bills anywhere with those first 3 picks, really. I mean, from 30 right in through to the second round. What do you think of their need there and whether it will line up with where guys will be available on Thursday and Friday?
Yeah, let's go through it quickly. I mean, the first at the 30th pick, you're probably looking at guys like Emeka Egbuka, who I think is going to walk in and be a kind of a pro's pro right away. He doesn't maybe have any superstars, but a very well-balanced, dependable, polished player who I think could be very good in time. Probably not a number 1, but maybe, I don't know. I could see. I don't know that his ceiling is exceptional high, but I think his floor is pretty high. Luther Burden, kind of a slot guy, interesting, has some real good yak ability. I mean, he breaks tackles like mad. He's got punt return ability, which, obviously if you have a special teams trait, it's a nice little add-on there. Sort of built like Deebo Samuel a little bit, more of a running back build and a receiver. And, again, depending on what you think of the Iowa State kids and guys like that, those are probably your options there. In round 2, it probably broadens a little bit. And you have more different body types, kind of the quicker, smaller guys like Jalen Noel, who I think is probably more of a second rounder. Jack Besh, who's probably got more of a similar build to Luther Burden, thicker, slot guy who can go up and get it as well. I really like his competitive spirit a lot. And then, some of the smaller, quicker guys, maybe he's a little too much like Khalil Shakir, but a Kyle Williams from Washington State or something like that. But, yeah, I mean, I think the options are a little bit limited after day 2, though. And I feel like we've been spoiled a little bit in recent years. I mean, I would say 8 of the last 10 years we've had what you could safely call a good wide receiver class. This one has its high notes for sure. and I think there will be some value picks. There always are, but I don't know that I'm totally enamored with this group to where you say, we'll find one. We'll get one along the way. I think this is the exercise where you have to say, like, where's the most likely place for us to find value? And I would guess it would probably be that second round, one of the second round picks. Where do they have 2 2s, no 3s, and 2 4s? Is that right?
Right.
Yeah. So, again, depending on what happens with trades, are they moving up? Are they moving down? Kind of leaves round 3 a little bit vacant. But I would say one of those second round picks, they should have, I forgot, Jalen Royals from Utah State. He's somebody I could see them liking, and they've scouted those sort of mid-level FBS schools well and done well with them. So, yeah, I mean, that's an option is that I would keep in mind if they want to go with a little more speed and a little more deep ability.
Eric, we had this conversation earlier in our first hour about what it could potentially mean if the Bills do find themselves in a position in the second round or at 30, if they do take a receiver. And to me, it most likely means that you're pushing Keon Coleman down your depth chart. And then you've got 2 second-round picks in back-to-back years, one of which is going to see less playing time. If you were to look at this draft class right now and sort of predict if Keon Coleman's in this draft, where in your mind, maybe take out what you saw from him in year 1 in the NFL, but just look at him as a prospect, is he still probably that early second-round guy in this draft too? Or maybe because of where the concentration of talent in this draft is, which is probably in the high 30s and into the 50s, same place kind of? Or do you can maybe view them as, maybe that's a reason the Bills don't take a second-round guy?
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. Now, obviously, if you find a different type of receiver, who complements what you already have at a little bit more deep speed or something like that, then all right, good. But yeah, that's an interesting way to frame it. We talk about, what if the quarterbacks were all lumped with last year's group? Well, let's do it with Coleman. I think his size, his strength at the catch point, was his competitiveness, was all the things that people were talking about. And you saw flashes of it, obviously. But, yeah, I mean, I would say if we just knew what we knew coming out of – I was about to say Michigan State, but if we're coming out of college, you'd probably be putting them in that Burden, Egbuka, late first, early second round range, I guess. And one of the reasons why, as I said, kind of hinted at earlier, this isn't a banner group of receivers. We're not, we're not going to look back and say, oh my goodness, the vaunted class of 25. And again, that's no disrespect to the guys who are in it, but I just think there's very little chance of this group surpassing what we've had in the last decade. Very many of those classes. So I still think he would probably go in that same kind of range, depending on what the team needs were and stuff, but. Yeah, obviously there's a hope that he takes a step up, that Dalton Kincaid kind of returns to form a little bit, and Shakir keeps stacking impressive games and seasons and all that, and then they could add one more. I would again, maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree here, but I would like to see somebody who can take the top off of defense and be able to get downfield and really take advantage of Josh's arm strength because, who was he targeting on that last throw? He's targeting the tight end. I know it was a broken play, but it kind of gives you a snapshot of they didn't really truly have that guy last year.
Yeah. Eric, real quick before you go, I want to circle back to the quarterbacks. And we heard last weekend, I think it was, that Jalen Milroe had been invited to the draft and had accepted. Yeah. Do you have any insight into how those decisions are made? Because I thought I had read and heard earlier this year that they wanted to make sure they were more selective because they don't want to embarrass people. I think it's pretty interesting that Milroe was invited and has accepted.
Now, the official list doesn't come out till, I believe, Monday. So, I guess this is a report. Okay. Again, I work for the league. I got to cover my you-know-what on this.
Gotcha.
But, yeah, when those things come out, there's always a handful of guys that you say, interesting. Okay, I didn't know we were considering him in the top 40 or so picks. So, but then again, every year there is somebody who slips to round 2 or – they go to the draft, they don't get picked, and then they fly home Friday morning or something, and they're not even there. Some guys stick around. But, usually this is based on feedback from the individual clubs. Mm-hmm. I'm sure National Football Scouting, the folks who kind of put the combine list together and help that event and organize to sort of the scouting world, if you will.
Yep.
I'm sure they have input on that. You know, I put Milroe, I think, at number 68 or 70 on my list. That's kind of a measure halfway between where I think he is as a prospect, which would be probably just outside of my top 100, and where the league might view him or where he might end up being drafted. So it's a little bit of a balancing act there.
Yep.
So, I mean, does that mean he's going to be a top 50 pick? It wouldn't totally shock me, just because if you've seen the guy move, he's a special, special athlete. It's just that we're talking about a pretty unrefined passer in some ways, and guy who may have taken a step backward last year. So, yeah, I was with you. That caught my eye.
All right, Eric, thank you so much for the time. We really appreciate it, and we'll get to work on, takeout power rankings next time we get a chance to visit, man. Have a great weekend.
Prepared for some pushback, I'll just say that. All right, fellas.
All right. Thanks, man. That's Eric.